Preparing to Sew, Chapter 36. Welcome to the world of sewing. Sewing gives you the opportunity to use patterns in your own creativity to create your own clothing and home fashions. If you have not sewn before, you may be a bit anxious. The information in this chapter will help make your sewing tasks successful, in addition to keeping you safe and your sewing equipment in good working order. If you have the right tools, sewing projects will be more fun and your work will be faster and easier. Small sewing equipment consists of cutting and measuring equipment, marking equipment, and pressing equipment, as well as a few other assorted items. You will use cutting equipment to cut fabric and thread. Keep your cutting equipment sharp by using it only for sewing. You will use measuring equipment to measure patterns, fabric, and garment pieces accurately as you sew. Here are the basics: small scissors, shears, seam ripper, tape measure, yardstick, sewing or seam gauge. Marking equipment helps you transfer construction markings such as buttonhole and pocket positions from your pattern pieces to the fabric. The following items are commonly used: tracing wheel, fabric marker, tailor's chalk. Pressing your project as you sew helps keep your work neat and gives it a finished and professional look. Basic pressing equipment includes an iron and an ironing board. Choose a steam iron and a well-padded ironing board with a tight-fitting cover. You also need a press cloth when pressing certain fabrics to keep them from scorching or developing a shine or glossy marking. You can buy ready-made press cloths or use a clean handkerchief or large, lightweight cloth. Use some small sewing aids to help you work on your sewing project: straight pins, pin cushions, thimble, hand sewing needles, machine needles. A sewing machine is one of the most important and most expensive pieces of sewing equipment you will use. Machine ranges from basic models to computerized machines that allow you to embroider and monogram with the touch of a button. However, you don't need a fancy machine. Basic models can handle most general sewing. Take some time to learn about the parts of the sewing machine and how to use it safely. Read the machine's operating manual or ask someone to show you how to operate and care for the machine. All sewing machines operate in a similar manner. Knowing the major parts helps you operate it successfully and safely. The parts shown are found on most sewing machines. Check your manual to see where they're located on your machine. Machines that embroider and monogram have additional parts or components: the hand wheel, the thread take-up lever, the throat plate, bobbin case, bobbin winder, feed dogs, presser foot liner, tension control, stitch length control, stitch width control, buttonhole control, stitch pattern control, reverse stitch control, spool pin, thread guides, foot and knee control. Before threading the machine, raise the presser foot and turn the wheel towards you to raise the needle and take up lever to the highest position. Thread must also be wound onto a bobbin. Follow directions in the owner's manual for threading the machine. After threading the machine and putting the filled bobbin into the bobbin case, bring the bobbin thread up through the hole in the throat plate. To do this, hold the end of the needle thread while turning the hand wheel towards you one full turn. The needle thread will pull up a loop of bobbin thread. Pull up on this loop until the thread end is out of the throat plate. All machines do straight stitching the same way. If you haven't sewn before or will be using a different machine, practice stitching. Raise and take up the lever and needle to the highest point. Pull the needle thread and bobbin thread to the right of the presser foot. Place the fabric under the presser foot. Start the machine slowly. Use the throat plate markings to guide your fabric through the machine. Slow the machine speed for the last few stitches. Secure stitching at both ends of a seam. The correct stitch length and tension make a seam attractive and strong. A medium length stitch is used for most fabrics. Some fabrics and sewing steps require different stitch lengths. Check the machine stitching on a 2-layer scrap of your fabric before beginning to sew. You can make changes in the stitch length by adjusting the stitch length control. Tension refers to the tightness or looseness of the thread. The tension is balanced when the stitching looks the same on both sides. It is not a balance if thread loops form on either side of the fabric. Newer machines seldom require tension adjustments when regular sewing machine is used in the needle and the bobbin. If tension problems occur, check the machine and bobbin threading before adjusting the tension dial. Incorrect threading is often the cause. If the tension needs adjusted, your machine's manual will tell you how to correct it. If the machine jams because thread has become tangled in the bobbin area, the thread must be carefully removed. Turn off the machine and check the manual or ask your teacher for further directions. Why do the seams in ready-to-wear clothes appear so smooth and neat? You can make garments that look as good as ready-to-wear clothing by using a serger. A serger or overlap machine stitches, trims, and finishes a seam in one step, and it's twice as fast as a sewing machine. Some garments, such as sweatshirts, can be sewn entirely on the serger. However, many projects require a sewing machine and a serger. Unlike sewing machines, sergers have cutters that trim the seam before it stitches, and it can also use 2 needles depending on the model. Sergers use more thread than sewing machines. Most serger thread comes on cones that hold 1,000 or more yards. Some sergers use 2 or more cones of thread for stitching. Sergers also have no bobbin. 2 loopers take the place of bobbins. When sewing with a serger, it is not necessary to lift the presser foot when starting to sew unless the fabric is thick. The serger feed dogs grip the fabric as you begin to sew. Also, you should never sew over pins with a serger because the pins will damage the serger's cutting knives and the pins could fly out and hurt you. All brands of sergers sew basically the same way. When you feed the fabric onto the machine, the feed dogs grip the fabric and pull it towards the cutters. The cutters trim the fabric edges before the fabric reaches the loopers and needles for stitching. Rather than back stitching, you simply run the fabric off the serger behind the needles. Securing the ends of the stitching is not necessary for most projects. You can find hundreds of sewing projects by looking through a pattern catalog, either in the fabric store or online. Catalogs are organized into different sections such as easy to sew styles, sportswear, and dresses, and show different views of a garment. Patterns and catalogs have assigned numbers. When you find a pattern you want, write the number down. You can find the pattern in the numbered cabinet drawers at the fabric store. The front and back of the pattern envelope contain important information that you can use to select a project. It also provides a list of the supplies you need for a project. Shows the parts of the pattern envelope. When you construct garments, you must take measurements. Take measurements over close-fitting clothes. Remove bulky sweaters, jackets, and belts. Give guidelines for measuring specific body parts. When you take the measurement, hold the tape measure with 2 fingers beneath the tape so that it fits snugly. Be sure it is not too tight or too loose. It is easier to work with a partner so that you can measure each other. Write each measurement down as you take it. You will use your body measurements to determine your figure type and the pattern size. Figure types, pattern size. Before purchasing garment fabric, ask yourself several questions. How appropriate is the fabric for your pattern and sewing skills? How will the fabric look on you? What kind of care will the fabric need? Buy fabric you like and will enjoy working with. If you are making an active sportswear garment, concentrate on fabrics that are durable. On the other hand, if you're making something for a special occasion, you might want a dressier fabric. When you purchase your fabric, remember to ask for the fabric care label and attach it to your garment. Interfacing is a special fabric that gives you support and body to a garment and project. It is placed between the facing and outer fabric and is not visible. It can be found in hats, belts, bags, and around necklines to keep them from stretching. Here's the pattern. You can buy sew-in or fusible interfacing. Sew-in interfacing is stitched to the garment. Fusible interfacing is pressed on with a hot iron. Choose an interfacing that has similar weight, body, and care requirements as your fabric. If you are unsure about a fabric, talk to a salesperson or your teacher. Notions are the small items such as thread, zippers, buttons, trim, seam biting, hooks, and eyes, snaps, needed to complete a garment. The back of the pattern envelope lists the notions you will need. Select thread just slightly darker than the fabric. If you have a print, match the thread with the main color in the print. Zippers come in a variety of colors, lengths, and styles. Check the pattern envelope for the zipper length and type suggested. Match the color of the zipper to the fabric as closely as possible. If the fabric has several colors, match the zipper to the background color. You will find the guide sheet and pattern pieces inside the pattern envelope. The guide sheet contains the following: sketches of different styles or views that can be made from the pattern, and a list of diagram of pattern pieces. Cutting layouts or diagrams that show how to lay pattern pieces on the fabric for different sizes, fabric widths, and types of fabric. Step-by-step instructions for sewing the garment or the project. Each pattern piece has pattern symbols or markings that serve as guides for laying out and sewing your project. Cutting lines, grain lines, place on fold, darts, placement line, seam line or stitching line, adjustment line, notches, dots, squares, and triangles. When you make a garment, you need to check to see how well the pattern fits you. You can do this by comparing your measurements with those on the pattern. Smooth out the pattern with your hands. Measure the pattern between stitching lines. Do not include seam allowances. In most cases, you can expect the pattern pieces to be larger than your exact body measurements. Don't worry, your pattern should be larger to account for wearing and design ease, the extra room needed for movement and comfort. Some garments have plenty of ease. However, if the garment is close fitting and the pattern measurements are much larger or smaller than your body measurements, you need to make some adjustments in your pattern. All woven fabric is made up of 2 sets of yarn or grain, lengthwise and crosswise. The lengthwise grain running the length of the fabric has little or no stretch. The selvage is the finished lengthwise edge of the fabric. It will not ravel. The crosswise grain running from the selvage to selvage has more stretch than the lengthwise grain. The true bias has the most stretch. Bias is the diagonal line formed when the do fabric is folded with the crosswise grain parallel to the selvage. Fabric's crosswise and lengthwise grain must be square at right angles to each other. When you cut out your pattern, otherwise the finished garment may not hang properly. It's difficult to check whether the fabric grain is straight if the crosswise edges are uneven. To straighten the fabric ends, clip into the selvage and pull one crosswise thread with one hand while pushing the fabric back with the other. Cut along this pulled thread line. If the thread breaks before you reach the other selvage, pick up the end of the broken thread and continue pulling and cutting as necessary. Fabrics need to be pre-shrunk before you can make your project. Pre-shrinking helps your project from shrinking after you make it. It also removes fabric finishes that could cause stitching problems. Pre-shrink washable fabrics in the same manner you plan to launder the finished garment. Follow the care label you received when you purchased your fabric. For fabrics that ravel easily, zigzag stitch or serge the cut edge before washing the fabric. All woven interfacing, zippers, and trims should be pre-shrunk. The pattern guide sheet lists the pattern pieces needed for each view. Before you lay out the pattern, cut apart the pattern pieces you need. Leave some extra paper outside the cutting lines on all pieces. On the guide sheet, cut off the pattern pieces needed as you find them and put the extra ones back into the envelope. Press the pattern pieces with a warm, dry iron if they are wrinkled. If you're working in the clothing lab, write your name on the pattern pieces so that you don't lose them. It is important to place pattern pieces on the fabric correctly. Once the fabric has been cut, it's difficult to correct the layout mistakes. Circle the layout you are using on the pattern guide sheet. Check the layout instructions carefully. Fold the fabric in the layout diagram. Position any large pattern pieces that go on the fold first. Use sharp shears to cut the fabric. Follow the outside cutting lines carefully. Do not cut on the fold line. Try to hold the pattern and fabric flat with one hand as you cut with the other to prevent the fabric from moving under the pattern. Do not pick up the fabric to cut it. Move around the table as you work instead of moving the fabric. Cut the notches outward, not inward. When you cut inward, you can weaken the seam. You could accidentally cut into the garment. If 2 or 3 notches are together, cut them across the top as one long notch. Keep pattern pieces pinned to the fabric for marking and identification. If you are using interfacing, cut out the interfacing when you finish cutting the fabric. The lines and symbols on your pattern are your guides for sewing accurately. Transfer these markings to the wrong side of your fabric before the pattern is unpinned. They must be visible as you sew, but should not show on the outside of the finished project. You can transfer markings to the fabric in one of several ways. You can make temporary markings on fabric using fabric markers. Test the markers on a fabric scrap first to make sure that the markings can be removed. You can also use chalk and pens. Put a pen through the pattern and fabric at the place to be marked. Make a chalk mark on the wrong side of the fabric layers at the pen marking. Another option is to use tracing pattern and a tracing wheel. Select a color of tracing paper that will be easily seen yet is close enough to the color of your fabric. Slide the tracing paper under the pattern with the waxy colored side against the wrong side of the fabric. If you need to make 2 layers of fabric, use 2 sheets of tracing paper, each facing the wrong side of the fabric. Roll the tracing wheel across the marking lines using a ruler to help keep the line straight. Mark dots with an X. You will answer these 12 questions.